Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ringside Nutrition Podcast. Today, I'm joined by a chap called Dr. James Morehen. So James has worked with super middleweight champion Rocky Fielding, and today we're going to talk about how he fueled him and how he made weight for some of his fights. So James, welcome to the podcast.
All good. How are we?
I'm not too bad, mate. Yourself?
Yeah. I'm good, thank you. Good.
So obviously,
COVID lockdown 2.0.
Yeah, me and James are just recording this now at the start of the second lockdown. So great opportunity for you guys to listen to this podcast and gain something from it. So James, obviously you work with Rocky Fielding. How on earth did that opportunity come about?
Yeah, I often ask myself this as well, but look, I was really lucky, mate. I studied my undergrad and degree and PhD at Liverpool John Moores, and really fortunate to be supervised by both Professor Graham Close and Professor James Morehen. And the way it came about, I vividly remember it. I was training in the gym that Dr. Cole Evans was kind of head of at the time, the strength and conditioning unit, and James Morehen came in, and he just asked me whether I'd like to do a little bit of work with Rocky Fielding. And at the time, James was at Team Sky. He was going into another kind of phase of the tour. And I'd been in the gym with James and Rocky at certain periods of the year and kind of knew Rocky a little bit. And I think James just saw a good opportunity to allow me to have a little bit of experience, train Rocky a little bit, and also just upskill kind of my knowledge and education around the weight making side of stuff with Rocky. So, I always say thanks to James, and I'll say thanks again, but it was James Morehen really that gave me that opportunity to start with, to do my first camp with Rocky. Obviously with James keeping some really close eyes over the top of it. So that's how it came about, through Professor Morehen.
Yeah, and you'd never really had much experience or interest maybe in boxing, no? What was your sort of sporting background or interest when you're studying and growing up and stuff?
Yeah, you're exactly right, mate. My background, I played football as a kid, but then really my sport's rugby. Absolutely love the game, and my PhD was with Professor Close, at Widnes Vikings for the first season, and then I went over to Warrington Wolves and finished 2 seasons there, looking after performance nutrition for professional rugby league players, and that's really where I learned a lot of my practical application of what we were learning on the masters and what I was learning in the PhD, and applying that into big 95, 125 kilo rugby players. So yeah, I was never really, always enjoyed watching boxing, but I'd never really worked in it. So when James gave me that opportunity, it was a good challenge, and one that, I had to go away, do a lot of reading, upskill myself on kind of the key literature. And I guess what a lot of people don't realize or may not realize is that me and Dr. Carl Evans, we actually lived together in Liverpool for, Christ, it would have been about 4 or 5 years. And so living in a flat together in Liverpool, we were constantly having discussions about obviously the rugby side of stuff. But then when I started working with Rocky, Carl is a fountain of knowledge and someone that had been through that process as an athlete in his younger days. So he was a great person to, be throwing a couple of questions at. We were discussing certain weight strategies, like, what's his thoughts on it? What's he seen in the literature? So I was really lucky that I had kind of a textbook in the flat with me in Carl Evans. So that is also where I upskilled myself a lot, listening to that man. So again, I have a lot of thanks for Cole for that.
So you started working with Rocky. Which camp or which fight did you start working with him for?
Christ, now you're testing me. The first camp we did was, I think it was John Ryder, where he was fighting for the British title at what used to be called the Liverpool Echo Arena. And yeah, so John Ryder is a southern lad. He's London Essex boy, I think, and so he came up and fought Rocky for the British title, and it was a very close fight actually. some people think that John should have won on the night. Rocky did win it by points, but that was the first camp that we worked together. And I remember being, very, very nervous about kind of the weight and, is he going to perform okay? Is he going to do well? Because, it was my first time helping an athlete cut that weight, I guess, and get the weight off. But yeah, that was the first fight. And then I think after that then led into a fight with the Scottish guy, Brophy. And that was for the Commonwealth title and the British on the line as well. So we then kind of won the British, won the Commonwealth. And then he then got that shot over in Germany against Tyrone Zeuge for the world title, or the regular world title.
So how did you find yourself working with, so you said that the first you've thrown in the deep end, you had to educate yourself and you've had the support there, but obviously you were working with someone who was fighting for a title and you're completely new to the sport. How did you deal with that kind of pressure?
Yeah, I think you just kind of, it's sink or swim, isn't it? And similar to my PhD, actually, the first day, not the first day, but the first day I went into the rugby club on my PhD, I was thrown in at the deep end by Closey. And it's probably the best way that I learn, actually. So yeah, with that world title fight, it was, the British title fight, first camp, it was, just like I said, massively immersing myself in the literature that was available at the time. Obviously, Carl and James Morehen have got their own respective papers out. We've got a case study with James, and then Cole's kind of weight making one. And it was just immersing myself in the literature, reading it, looking at what's been done already. But then also, I found some real value in just sitting down with Rocky and getting to know him as an individual, understanding what works well with him. Did he like to actively sweat or passively sweat? What was his nutritional behaviors like? Was he sticking to the plan, or could I tap into his partner and kind of get her to support him a little bit on the nutritional side of stuff? So I was looking at the overall approach, thinking, okay, yeah, he's got to make weight, but what else has an impact on that in his life at the moment? And he had a young child at the time, so sleep wasn't really something that he was getting. So there was loads of other things outside really of nutrition per se that were contributing to me just getting to know this individual as a person first, which I think massively helped me.
I think that is a really important point to make. And when I'm working with someone as well, it is about how you interact with them as a person, and you ask about their family or what they're getting up to at the weekends and what they're doing out of camp and all that kind of stuff, and actually showing an interest in them as a person. Because I think that fighters in particular, it's a lonely sport. Everybody wants to feel valued, right? But especially fighters want to feel valued and show that you care about them. So I think getting to know them on a personal level is really important. Yeah,
and just to add in there, I found real value as well in speaking to Jamie Moore. So Jamie, again, ex-fighter, very, very well-respected coach in the game now. And speaking to him, this is a guy that's got an unbelievable wealth of craft knowledge of being a fighter, now a coach. And, he knew Rocky probably better than anyone. And so did Oliver Harrison, the late Oliver Harrison at the time. And so it was talking to them guys about, what is it that Rocky needs? Like, what support does he need? What gets him going? What gets him ticking? And even things, from Jamie, like at the time, I didn't understand how important it was to keep your fighter at sparring weight as long as possible.
Yeah, that's really important.
And I didn't know that at the time, and it just wasn't anything that's really written in the literature, I guess. But I only found that out by speaking to Jamie, and he was like, mate, I want you to keep Rocky at this certain weight for his last spar. And then after that, that's where we can then focus on that acute weight loss. But without having that conversation with those key stakeholders around Rocky, that almost, imagine Rocky in the middle of that ecosystem, speaking to all of those key people around him. Without knowing that, I probably would have took the weight off of him too quickly.
Yeah. And would you say as well, having the conversations around things like the weight and the nutrition strategies, actually with people like Jamie Moore, like you said there, without actually involving Rocky in those conversations? Did you do that quite a lot and sort of talking about the boxer or talking about the fighter without involving the fighter so much, just so it's not like that mental overload for the fighter?
Yeah, there were elements of that. And I'll tell you where we did that really successfully, in my opinion, was when we were out in Germany, because, we were there for kind of 5 days prior to the fight. And so there was some really good time to just sit down with Jamie over a coffee and have a chat to him if Rocky was resting in the hotel room. And it was speaking to him there about the weight. I was constantly checking in with him saying, look, this is the weight he's currently at. Are you happy as the trainer? And, bouncing ideas off of each other. And I remember vividly in Germany, it was about 30 degrees at the time. And so the weight actually came off Rocky really quickly, because it was that hot that, I mean, even I was sweating walking around Germany in Offenburg. So if you put some trousers and a hoodie on Rocky and you went for a little 20-minute run, it was flying out of him. But yeah, those conversations definitely had with Jamie without Rocky, but also included Rocky in a good number of them, because ultimately he's the athlete. He's the one that wants to know about what's going on. And I think the biggest thing that I had with Rocky was him putting his trust in me. Knowing that. Yeah, I suppose knowing that he knew that I knew he was going to make the weight, if that makes sense. And he's even said that on like a presentation I've done where he said that he thinks that at times I knew his body better than he did. And I think that just comes with really working closely with that individual.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Germany fight against Zeuge. So you started, obviously you're working with him for a couple of camps. The title fight comes up. What was the notice period? Was it 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks? How much notice did you have for that fight?
Yeah, so it was actually 6 weeks notice. And the reason it was quite short was because there'd been a number of fights that were kind of looking at getting signed, but then they didn't happen. And so Jamie just constantly said to Rocky, look, just stay ready, like just keep yourself ready. And so the actual duration of the full kind of training period was about 14 weeks. But then, so we did an element of a camp. And then, if I remember rightly, that a fight got called off. So we had a couple of weeks rest, just to, chill out, take his head out of the game. But he stayed ready. He was staying training. He wasn't as intense with it. And then bang, we got a phone call 6 weeks prior to say, look, you've got opportunity of a world title fight, Zeuge, in the backyard. Do you want to take it? And Rocky was never going to say no to that. So we then had that 6 week notice to, I think it was 10.6 kilos we had to get off in 6 weeks. Which he was always going to do it because it was like a world title fight. But then it was, I remember sitting down with Carl in the flat and we were looking at the numbers thinking, physiologically, is this right? Is it possible? Is it healthy? But then we were also considering, okay, knowing how much Rocky could lose in that final week with that acute weight loss, factoring that into the total weight loss over the course of the camp, we were then beginning to look at kind of just over a 1.1 kilo weight loss per week. When you looked at it spread over that course of the week, including the acute weight loss at the end as well.
Yeah. So that's obviously quite like a short camp and you had to act pretty quickly and tighten up the screws really quickly. So you had the call, yeah, he's going to have this title fight. What was the thing you did first thing or the next day? Did you do any body composition analysis or get him in for testing or anything?
Yeah. So prior to that, we'd already had, just thinking how many we would have done, probably 4 or 5 like body comps and RMRs that we'd had with Rocky previously. But yeah, it was let's get into Liverpool John Moores, the Tom O'Reilly building, and let's get resting metabolic rate done, and let's get a DEXA scan done, and let's really look at body composition. Where are you currently, and what have we got to play with? And I know, obviously, on your previous episode with Carl, he talked in depth about the importance of getting those numbers, and I know you do it in your practice as well. But yeah, kind of without them numbers with Rocky, it would have been a bit of a guessing game. So really important to understand, this is where you're currently at body composition wise. This is what your resting metabolic rate is telling me 6 weeks out. And now we can begin to tailor that nutritional intake aligned to his training demands with Jamie, whether it was a single, double, triple training day. If Sunday's a rest day, how can we tweak that to allow the weight to kind of carry on coming down? And then just building that plan. And really I think the success I had with that with Rocky was almost making it foolproof. So he didn't have to worry about lunches and dinners because I got a company to look after him for that. We weighed it out, so we knew exactly what macros he was consuming in those lunches and dinners. And then that allowed us to really piece together that puzzle with the rest of the energy intake, with things like, sachets of porridge, which you knew were X amount of carbohydrates. You knew that half a bag of Uncle Ben's rice was going to equal X amount. So we tried to keep it really as simple as possible. Even, a protein bar contains X amount. So let's factor that in. An Arla protein yogurt or a high protein yogurt equals this. So we just built that plan around things that he didn't really have to produce himself, if I'm honest. To keep it really simple.
So he could just 100% focus on training and the big task ahead. He didn't really want to think about what fruits am I going to chop up and put in my porridge, or how am I going to make the stir fry. You just took everything away from him. I guess that's what he was paying you for, right? So
exactly. And again, Rocky's come out and said that what he really enjoyed is that he then didn't have to worry about nutrition. He knew that if a plan was sent to him and it was simple to go, right, I need that for breakfast, I need that as a snack, lunch and dinner's provided, I'm going to have that before bed. He just didn't have to worry about prepping any of it and, sending it to his partner as well. She could essentially get it out of the fridge, put it in a lunchbox for him, and off he went to training. And it was as simple as that. And he said that then allowed him to focus on sparring. It allowed him to focus on training because he wasn't thinking, oh Christ, what is it I need to be eating at 2:00? It was there in his bag, and he had the plan, and he knew that, okay, that has to go in at this time.
Yeah. And it just takes the anxiety. And I mean, I still can't believe, like, when I see some stuff online or I watch some like boxing shows and stuff, like last weekend, and Lee Selby saying that he used to kill himself to make weight, and this is a world champion and wasn't getting any sort of support with his nutrition. It still amazes me how, some boxers are at a top level but are still not getting that level of support. And it does, like you said, just make it so much easier for them, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So they've had you've done the plan. Did you tweak the plan each week, or was it kind of just like a set plan which you pretty much followed for like 5 weeks just to make it easier, or did you chop and change it as you went?
No, we did used to tweak it, and it was probably tweaked in line with where his weight was. So, interestingly enough, every camp that I did with Rocky, there was always a period in that camp where the weight would begin to stick. So we used to collect body weight quite regularly, and it wasn't necessarily collecting the weight to see what you're at in terms of I'm checking in on you. It was just for my own benefit to look at, okay, this is how much we're losing every week. That's the average that's coming off every week. And okay, we've now entered a period of the camp where for whatever reason, the weight seems to be sticking a little bit. And it was almost that cue to me to then say, right, now we can tweak down the carbs just a little bit more, or we bring down the total calories a little bit, just to kind of keep that weight ticking down. And that happened every camp. And I remember 2 camps back to back. It almost happened the same week in that camp. And
that's the importance of capturing the data. So before you've seen it before, and then okay, well, this has happened before, this is another, and then you know what to do. So that just highlights the importance of capturing that data.
Yeah, sure. And again, it was that, Rocky remaining calm and me explaining to him, look, mate, don't worry. Like, isn't this interesting to see that this was the same period last camp? But we know that if we tweak this, and as an example, let's pull down carbohydrates by 30 grams on your double training days for the next 2 weeks, and let's just see how that plays out. And then, that will begin to trickle down that weight again. So it was just really, I think, the more data I could get out of it, the better. And, having done a PhD, anyone that's studying masters or PhDs, you are data driven. You have to be in some form or another. And so I got really excited about the amount of data that I could get from him. I don't think he was bothered that much, but it just gave me that security, I guess, that I was looking at the data and it was similar to what I saw last camp. And a good example there was the 35 days out from the Zeuge weigh-in. I decided to collect weight every single day. And again, it wasn't checking Rocky to say, you need to be at this weight. Why aren't you at this weight? It was, more because I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to collect that daily weight and look at how it comes down? What was the average amount he lost each week? And then what was beautiful with that is that we had this really good kind of weight loss over the 35 days. And then I then tried to mirror it for the Canelo fight in New York City. And we almost hit it exactly on the money. 35 days out, his weight was trickling down just as he did for the Zeuge fight. And by his own admission, he said that he probably made the weight the best he's ever made it for the Zeuge fight. So I was thinking, okay, well, if we can mirror that weight loss then 35 days out, then, we'll put you in a great position in New York.
Yeah. And when you said you did the resting metabolic rate, what can you remember what his resting metabolic rate actually was? And how did you pitch calories, like daily calories? So where did you kind of pitch the daily calories above the resting metabolic rate?
Yeah, so top of my head, I think he was in and around 1,870. So he was up towards the kind of pushing 2,000 a little bit. Interestingly enough, we captured 5 RMRs over the course of the time that I worked with him, and it was all within that region of 1,800 to kind of 2,000, depending on how heavy he started the camp at, and obviously how much lean mass he presented with at the start of each respective camps. So then I would look at that and I would think, okay, well, on a triple training day, looking at his heart rate data and the intensity of the sessions with time and a session RPE attached to it, these sessions are going to be quite calorie dependent, I guess. So trying to figure out, and this was never done, I guess a doubly labeled water energy expenditure study. It was using heart rate, it was using session RPEs, it was using duration. And his main days were triple training days, double training days, single days, and then a rest day. And so it was looking at that, thinking, right, if his RMR is 1,800 to 2,000, how many calories do I want above on a triple training day? And again, when I first started with Rocky, it was, I wouldn't say it was guessing, but it was almost being led by him to say, look, what do you normally eat when you go and do a triple training day, and how do you feel with that? And then I would capture all of that and figure out, right, on a triple training day, he's actually quite happy to be consuming, for example, 2,700 calories. And that amount was allowing that weight to come down a little bit. Mm-hmm. But if you then add 2,700 on a single training day, that's where you might have seen the sticking of the weight. So it was then just working back and pulling down that calories ever so slightly, depending on what training day he had. And as the camps went on, we probably got that tighter and tighter and tighter, to the point that, on a single training day or even rest day, he'd happily just have 1,800 calories or 2,000 calories. He wasn't really hungry with that. We'd keep the protein relatively high, up towards a 2 gram per kilo. I know Cole spoke about the kind of the 3-2-1 ratio.
We can touch on it now, James. What was kind of like the thoughts behind that? Why were you keeping protein quite high? What was the goal of keeping protein high with Rocky that camp?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the chronic weight making stuff that obviously James has done with his case study, the rationale to keep the protein high was to try and preserve the lean mass as much as we could. Also to give him the calorie intake or content from having a high protein diet. But the main thing was to keep that lean mass preservation, I guess. And also thinking about the satiety effect of protein, normally having that higher protein diet would kind of keep you fuller for longer. And I remember on occasions where Rocky would say, he'd text me and say, mate, I'm feeling a bit peckish in the evening. It's that dangerous window between dinner and pre-bed, where, sitting at home on the sofa, he's chilling out, missus might be having a bowl of ice cream or whatever. And he was there thinking, I'm a bit peckish. And I remember actually chatting with Carl about it and said, what would be a decent snack to be going in here? And then we suggested for Rocky just having some I think they're cognac noodles, where they're like 98% noodles. There's a company called Bare Naked Noodles that have actually branded the noodle up, but the cognac noodles, which are basically water noodles with some lean turkey. And it was like 120, 150 calorie intake of basically 20 grams of protein with lean turkey going in that period before bed. And the thing with Rocky was, I remember him telling me that it wasn't necessarily that he wanted to fill his stomach up. It was just that feeling.
Just have something there.
Yeah, putting fork to the mouth and actually eating something that hit that spot. So yeah, I kind of diverged a little bit there, but we would keep protein high. We would try and keep it at 2 to 2.2 gram per kilo. Sometimes we'd go up to 2.5 gram per kilo, depending on the training day. And then the carbohydrate, we would try and follow almost an undulating periodization with the carbohydrate, depending on the training day as well.
Awesome stuff. Yeah. So you got down to, getting towards fight day now, and you obviously had to travel out to Germany. How did you sort of navigate the travel nutrition strategy, and how did you operate that to obviously help, reduce his risk of getting ill on the plane and stuff like that? How did you map that out?
Yeah, so again, it was using some of my applied practice that I'd done in the rugby world, really, in terms of what I'd done on flights with them, but then also getting the head into the literature. So Professor Neil Walsh, who's now at Liverpool John Moores University, he's got some brilliant papers looking at, nutrition and athlete health, athlete immune health. So it was reading that and thinking about, right, okay, what practically can I do to make sure that this individual arrives at Manchester Airport in a good state, gets on that aluminium tube in the air, doesn't pick up any illnesses off anyone that he's sitting around, and arrives in Germany kind of fit and healthy. So I just used to do simple strategies really of, and I know we're in the world of COVID now, but it was giving that man, so I gave Rocky, Nigel Travis, Jamie Moore, I gave them all a athlete kind of nutrition care package, if you like. And in there it consumed, it had hand gel, because none of them thought of that. So I was like, right, fellas, we need to protect the hands. It was chewing gum to look after the mucosal. It was a a First Defense nasal spray, which of course I then checked on Global Dro and made sure that it was okay for this athlete to obviously have. And then we then looked at, just trying to think, eye drops. So there was some eye drops as well. And then it was just high protein snacks that he could have on the plane, because I didn't really want him having the classic Ryanair bacon roll and a coffee. I wanted him to consume some better quality food on that flight going over. And then we made sure actually before the flight that we all just had a decent meal at the airport to make sure that he wasn't going to get the cravings on the flight as well. So in summary there, it was like the hand gel, chewing gum, nasal spray, eye drops. And then the other thing I said to him, and we did this especially for New York, that if he was sitting next to someone that was coughing and sneezing, and they were in the kind of the 4 meter vicinity of him, I just said to him, like, let me know and we'll swap seats, because I would much rather I pick up that illness if it was a cough or a cold than the athlete. And so unfortunately we didn't have to do that. But that was just another thing I was thinking of, that you never know if someone's sneezing 2 seats down from you, the likelihood is you're probably going to catch whatever they've got.
Yeah. What fascinates me, James, actually is just the kind of the level of detail. And what I think some people don't understand is you're reading the literature on immunity. So you're getting the right information, you're then applying it, you're thinking of those little things like the hand gels, the First Defense spray, you're checking to see if he can actually have the First Defense spray on, checking it on, to see if he can have it. All those kind of little details, I don't think people realize the level of detail which you can go into to make sure that fighter is in the best possible condition to fight. So you touched down in Germany. How close to the weight was he, or how, as a percentage, whereabouts was he from his weigh-in weight?
Yeah, I'll just as I'm talking, I'll pull it all up so we can actually give the exact numbers. But yeah, he so I'm just trying to think. I think we got out there 5 days prior, and he wasn't that far off the weight, if I'm honest. So I'm just going to pull it up now. So body comp. Yeah, so we weren't far off the weight, and it was, like I said, we were really lucky. So 34 days out from the fight, Rocky was 10.4 kilos above, and that represented a 13.6% body mass change. So that was 34 days out. When we actually got there, so it was 4 days out when we got there, he was 79.6 kilos, which represented a 4.5% body mass change. And that equated to 3.4 kilos above the weigh-in weight. So we basically then had 96 hours for this individual to lose 3.4 kilo, which, as I've said, was 4.5%. So, again, speaking with Cole before I went, looking at Reed Reel's acute weight loss research that he's done with Gary Slater and Louise Burke, and that accepted region of around 5 to 8% of body mass loss in that final 7-day period. 4 days out, Rocky's at 4.5%. So I was thinking, okay, we're in a good position here. And like I said, it was 30 degrees over there. So I was thinking, I know how much, or I know the level of acute weight loss that he can do from water, which of course was the last thing that we took out. But also, I used to just, little things that I used to note down was how quick Rocky would sweat. So even in the gym, if he was on the treadmill, I'd note down, it was around 7 minutes 40, that man would start perspirating quite a lot. And so I knew that in the gym in Liverpool, after 7 minutes, we could get that man sweating. And lo and behold, 32 degrees in Germany in July, that started happening a lot sooner. And so I knew, over that 96 hour window, we were, I don't think we were going to struggle with that weight, because we had 4.5% to get off 3.4 kilos in 96 hours.
That's just like knowing the individual as well. Like if you saw that he was sweating loads in training, or you saw that at kind of like not a very hot heat or high heat that he wasn't sweating that much, you can then think, okay, fast forward it and think, okay, if we were to be sat there outside or at the hotel and he needs to sweat out, less than 2% as an acute weight loss strategy, we know that he's going to give up that water. Whereas if you were sort of with him in training and you're thinking, it's been half an hour into the training session and he's not sweating at all, you're kind of running the risk, aren't you, then, of just hoping that when he comes around to the acute weight loss stage in fight week that he's going to sweat when he may not do. So
yeah, and it was just little things like, Rocky's family, it was a world title fight. So there was about 90 Scousers over there, including his family. And they all came out like 3 days prior. And so there was a lot of walking around the town, nothing too strenuous, but expenditure was up. And so I knew that if we were to begin to pull his nutritional intake down, to follow the acute weight loss strategies that have been published in the literature that we'd used previously with him in the UK as well, I knew that would just start ticking over. And again, I'm looking at the data here. Like if we look at the weigh-in day, when Rocky woke up in the morning, he was 78.5 kilos. So he was 2.3 kilos above weight, and that represented a 3% body loss change. That was when he woke up. We then went for a 20-minute run, and he went down to 77.6. So he was only now 1.4 kilos above the weigh-in weight, and that was at 11 a.m. in the morning, and he didn't have to weigh in until 3 in the afternoon. And from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock, we basically were in a little courtyard outside the hotel. He had a skipping rope on him. I had some jelly babies and a bit of coffee so that I could kind of feed him a little bit of sugar should he want it. And he just kind of did, 10, 15 minutes of skipping, sat down, chilled out. We were all there in the sun. He was sweating, but it wasn't, sitting in a sauna, unbelievably kind of trying to sweat out an insane amount of weight. It was we've got 4 hours to go and you're 1.4 kilos overweight. And then I tracked it at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 2:30 and 3 o'clock. And 2:30, he was 200 grams over the weight. And then I knew that, okay, we're not weighing in until kind of 3, 3:30. We've got 200 grams to lose. we don't really need to be doing anything more because your metabolism's up, like you're skipping, it's hot weather. I'm probably going to lose half a kilo anyway because I'm sweating. And we just knew that final 200 grams was going to come off no problem. And so at 3 o'clock, we got him on the scales at the hotel and he was on the money.
Yeah. And something Carl spoke about on the first episode of this podcast was about leaving that acute dehydration until the actual day of the weigh-in and leaving it. It's almost counterproductive to do it 4 days before. And a lot of people will not drink or eat anything 3-4 days before. You obviously fed him, all the way up until the weigh-in day. And then in that 6-7 hour period, you've just gone, okay, well, we're just going to play around with acute dehydration here. How did he feel, James? Did he feel like worried, or did he feel like anxious that he was still over the weight, or did he, by then, had you had the buy-in for him to trust you?
Yeah, I think, look, I'm not going to lie. There was definitely conversations from Rocky saying, am I going to make the weight? And I think with the importance of that fight, let's not forget, for this man, this was a career-defining moment. This was a world, title fight, regular title. It changed his life. And of course, he was nervous. Am I going to make the weight? And he was asking me, he was checking in. And I was, you go back to your knowledge and your education of physiology. And, I was looking at this man presenting on the scales, 200 grams overweight with an hour before the weigh-in. And you look, I was even questioning myself saying, well, he surely can't put weight on, because if nothing goes in him, if he doesn't eat anything and he doesn't drink anything, surely it's not going to go up. And obviously it didn't. But you're kind of questioning yourself a little bit, but you've just got to go back to what you know best, which is what we all learn in the university, and understand how physiology works. And yeah, he was, there was a couple of questions, but it was just remaining calm and saying, look, Rocky, you've got an hour to go, mate. You're 200 grams over. If you go to the toilet and have, a urine pass, you're probably on the weight anyway.
Yeah.
So,
and what was the sort of feeding him the jelly babies, James? What was the idea behind that? Why were you feeding him those kind of high glycemic, small volume, sweets before?
Yeah, I mean, because if we just go back a bit, when he woke up at 78.5 kilos, so I knew from his previous fights and his previous kind of acute weight losses that we took off 3.5, 4 kilos from Rocky in the final 48 hours previously. So I knew that on the morning of weigh-in, 2.3 kilos overweight, I knew he was going to make the weight okay. And so even that morning, he had Americano, he had a little bit of breakfast. So he got a bit of food in him before we went for the run. And then the idea of the sweets, if I'm honest, Jack, was just to have a little bit of sugar there, a little bit of energy for him, because it was very lightweight. It wasn't a heavy food. And it was just a bit of sugar going into the body just to give him a bit of a pickup, because, he'd had a coffee and breakfast in the morning, but we're now talking about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And he wasn't that hungry because I think he was nervous about the weigh-in. The adrenaline was pumping. It was ridiculously hot. So, you're not going to want a hot lunch anyway. And the sweets were there just as a bit of a treat, really. It was almost, you've done 20 minutes of skipping, have a couple of jelly babies. And I'm not saying that's the way you do it with everyone, but certainly for Rocky and as well as I knew him, and the fact I knew he was going to make that weight okay, giving him a few sweets was, it just kept him smiling, I guess.
Yeah. And so he's weighed in, all good. What did you how did you approach it after the weigh-in? What kind of foods did you give him? Did you have a plan in place? Did you have meal prep, or did you just kind of have the hotel food? It'd be really cool to sort of share your insights on that.
Yeah. So we, the first thing I wanted to focus on, of course, with the weather and the fact that he had done a little bit of dehydration there was to get that water and fluid back into the body. So again, I remember reading Real's article, and there's a lovely bit in there from Ronald Morn talking about the benefits of kind of milk, and in particular flavored milk, going back into the body, and how that helps rehydrate. So I went to the local shop and just picked up Germany's version of chocolate Zeuge. And kind of that had that on ice. It was ice cold, and we had 2 bottles of that. So that was, what were they, 330 ml. So we had around 700 ml of chocolate milk going in straight away, which he absolutely loved and devoured. Then we had an oral rehydration solution that went back in. That was a 500 ml bottle. Excuse me. And then after that, it was he had to do an element of media and press, but I was quite comfortable that I'd got the fluids back into him. And then we just went for a team lunch. And I remember speaking to Carl about this as well, that, you know, I didn't really know what way to approach it. Did I stipulate he had to eat this meal, or did I go down the route of, do you know what, you've just made weight.
Mm-hmm.
It's a world title fight. It's the biggest fight of your career. You've got 90 Scousers out here. You've got your family with you. Just go and have lunch. And so we all went and had lunch together. And all I did was I had a little notebook with me at all times. And I just basically did a photographic food memory. So I took a picture of what he ordered and what he was eating, and then wrote it down. And then that evening, I went back into Nutritics. I uploaded it all. And I just had a look at, okay, how much had he eaten? Where was he at? And did I need to top him up with anything? And so once he'd weighed in, he was back in the region of around 4.6 grams per kilo of carbs that he'd consumed. So I knew that we'd had a decent amount of glycogen going back into the muscles. And I mean, I remember his meal now. It was like a spag bolognese with garlic bread. He had 2 cans of Coke, I think. And then afterwards, we found this little ice cream parlor, and I could see him staring at this chocolate sundae. And so I just said to him, I was like, mate, if you want to rip into that, go ahead. So it was like, bang, straight in, got the euros out, paid for this chocolate sundae. But again, I was taking pictures of it and trying my best to look at it and go, right, okay, put that into Nutritics. Let's have a look at how much he's having. And then I remember that evening just taking him a couple of carbohydrate gels and a high carb electrolyte solution before bed, and just saying, look, I think it would be good if you got these in this evening window before you went to bed, just to kind of top up that kind of recovery strategy and weight regain. Awesome. So again, I'm looking here, like, before he went to bed, we did a pre-bed weigh-in. So bearing in mind that he weighed in at 3:10 at 76.2. He then went to bed at 79.8. So he'd put on 3.6 kilos in that period of 3 o'clock to bedtime, which represented a 4.7% increase in body weight.
Wow. So he obviously had all those foods and stuff, and you said he had the electrolyte drink and the chocolate milks. For the guys listening, did he have those all in one go? Is that's quite an important point, isn't it? Not to just smash or have all of the drinks at one time. It's to kind of space them out over time. Did you sort of have these 2 chocolate milks and then finish this electrolyte drink by 2 p.m. or before you go to the media or something?
Yeah. Sorry. So that was probably a bit confusing. When I said he smashed it, I meant that he like absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it, rather than smashing all 3 of them down at the same time. So you're exactly right. He had his first chocolate milk, which I've got. I gave that to him once he'd made the weight and got off the scale, and then he had that during his interview with Sky Sports, and then following that he'd finished it. So I then gave him the second one and was like, if you want to get that in now, you can. So he sipped on that, and then when we went from the media center where we were to the restaurant, that's where he then had his oral rehydration solution. So it was probably within 2 to 3 hours he'd consumed those fluids, and then we were then obviously presenting at the lunch table, and that's where he was then getting the first kind of amount of food to go in.
And that meant he was with his family and he's a happy fighter, but you're still keeping a plan sort of, you know, to yourself, so that you know that he's on track but not worrying him about it. I think that's really important, and something that people don't almost realize is that if you have that good psychological state, then you're going to be much more dangerous, as opposed to maybe you saying, oh, Rocky, you've got to have this. Like, he's just weighed in, right? He's just done a monumental challenge and weighing in. You know, wants to enjoy himself.
That's what, you know, I wanted him to enjoy it. Like, it's an unbelievable moment in his career. He's got his whole family there, and if they wanted to go for an Italian or they wanted to go for a Mexican, or, you know, I'm not gonna dictate what they go and have a family meal with. But what I will do is monitor and track what's going into the bodies, so that I've got a good idea as to, am I now presenting this fighter on the day of the fight in a good optimal position from a hydration point of view and from a fueling point of view. And I remember his brothers, you know, two great blokes that have been to every fight of his career, and, you know, speaking to them and saying, like, he looks like he's in a really good place, and them saying to me, like, he looks like he's ready for this. And I think it's those little comments that, outside of nutrition and weight making, you know, it's just really important to think about that whole package. And that was certainly something that I was always conscious of, because he is a massive family man. And so I didn't want to kind of get in the way of that.
And how did you kind of, if you flip it to the Canelo fight in New York, did your approach change at all for that? Or did you obviously, like, did you follow a similar approach to that you did with that fight? And how did you navigate specifically, like, the post weigh-in and the weigh-in bit here, James? How did you go about that situation again when you're in New York?
Yeah, so I have to give credit to another practitioner in the industry called David Dunn, who has worked with the Conlon brothers. And the reason I'm saying this is because when I went to New York, there was an Irish bar called Mustang Harry's. And it was probably about 5-minute walk from the hotel, but it was sandwiched kind of the other side of Maddison Square Garden. And the guys at Mustang Harry's were fantastic for us. David linked me into them. He introduced me, but they were brilliant, in so much so that I could text them, I could WhatsApp them about 20 minutes before we were due to arrive. And I could tell them exactly what I wanted on the plate. And so, for example, if I wanted 200 grams of white rice and I wanted it boiled without any salt, and I wanted 150 grams of a turkey steak grilled with no butter, no sauce, and, you know, I'd WhatsApp that through to them. Then 20 minutes later, we'd arrive. It would be there on a plate in the corner of the restaurant. You know, we could all sit down, Rocky could eat, and then we'd leave straight away. And, you know, the guys didn't even charge us. It was amazing. We offered to pay, of course we did, but they just wanted to see, you know, a boxer kind of do what they needed to do at Maddison Square Garden. And so that was a real key restaurant for us, because following the weigh-in, he'd made the weight. There was definitely more media stuff that was being done, and I was conscious of that. So I had a few snacks on me. I had all of the oral rehydration solutions, the chocolate milks, etc. We kind of mirrored what we did in Germany, but then we went to Mustang Harry's, and that's where we had that kind of first meal to get that in. Because if anyone who's been to New York, you can get caught up quite quickly in all of the side street vendors, and before you know it, you're in like a coffee shop where there's donuts and pastries everywhere. But we didn't want to put him in that situation, really. And another thing that I did out there, we were at that hotel for 7 days. So prior to me going, I got the menu from the hotel, downloaded the PDF, and I was looking at that menu thinking, right, what meals could Rocky have off this menu that would be suitable for him if he wanted to eat back at the hotel rather than Mustang Harry's. And also because Rocky was kind of upgraded in his stay at the hotel, we had access to the first class lounge in the lobby area. And in that lobby area, every day they had kind of fresh orange juice, fresh grapefruit juice, bananas, kind of chicken wraps, etc. That was out every day. So I also, you know, robbed a couple of those things from the hotel. But what I then had in my bag was, again, you know, 300 mils of orange juice that had the label on the back that I could whip out and say, Rocky, here, get this in. I would then note that down in my little notebook. And again, that evening, I would then run it all through Nutritics, and I'd be like, right, you know, this is how much he's had. Is that enough, or does he need to be having a little bit more? So yeah, long-winded way to answer you there, but yeah, we had kind of a set plan post weigh-in that we were going to go for that meal. And then in the evening, actually, we went to a really famous Italian restaurant again. And that was a full family affair with all of us there. Amazing place. But again, I wasn't dictating what he needed to eat. It was more keep an eye, have a look at his plate, take some pictures, run that through Nutritics in the evening.
Yeah, I only asked James because obviously you're going away for 2 international fights in other countries, and if it was back home, you may have prepared the meals yourself or got a meal prep company involved to prepare all of his post-weigh meals. So I think it's really invaluable for anybody listening to sort of note to the level of detail and structure that you approach the nutritional interventions post-weigh-in and stuff when competing abroad. I think it's an important thing to consider in checking the menus and not just rocking up and just hoping that there'll be stuff there. I was
just going to say there's 2 things here that I think are quite important. The first thing I did when we landed was Rocky went and had a sleep because of the jet lag. He was a little bit tired anyway, travel fatigue. And so the first thing I did was I then went out and had a walk around the hotel to kind of almost pinpoint, okay, where could be the go-to places that we could go and get some decent food. Where were the streets to avoid? If it was McDonald's and Burger King, like let's not walk down that street because he's going to be looking at it and he might have a few cravings. So it was even little things like that, just identifying where was the good establishments to be eating at. And then another thing that I learned prior to going to America was that the New York Boxing Commission, they wanted to know every single supplement that man was consuming. And so I had to write out quite an extensive list as to what kind of travel strategy I had in terms of what supplements was he having on the flight. And they also wanted to know exactly what he was consuming in that 7 day prior to the weigh-in.
Wow.
I don't know if that was something that is standard or whether it was Canelo's camp putting a bit of pressure on, I don't know. But that was something that I've never done before, but something that we had to write out because they wanted to know it. And then also with it being the Canelo fight, there was obviously the doping control afterwards, which again, we had to write out on that form exactly what he'd consumed in that fight. I think it was the 72 hours prior to the fight for that particular form. But it's probably just a note there to people that may or may not be listening about, if you are put on the spot and someone says, what has he consumed in the final 72 hours? You know exactly what he's consumed. And you've got the global DRO certificate for the nasal spray. And you've also got the batch certificates for all of the supplements, because what you don't want to be is in a position where there may be a test that comes back that's not the result you want. And all of a sudden you haven't got your due diligence of all of the certificates.
Yeah. So did you have to obviously take all the supplements with you on the plane and that kind of stuff? Yeah.
Yeah. So my suitcase was basically half clothing, half supplements. And I just took it all over with me. Yeah. Linked up with a couple of the supplement companies who, I've got contacts with, and just took it all over with me, mate. If I'm honest, made sure I had the batch certs. I had a full folder that had all of those details in. So I had the peace of mind that the moment that the commissioner asked for the details, bang, out came the wallet. Here's all the paperwork. This is exactly what he's been having. And yeah, filled out the form.
Amazing, James. Yeah. Another thing that people probably wouldn't think about, or people wouldn't think about when they're actually working with a fighter as well, and the level of detail that you do need to go into. Just before we wrap things up, James, I want to ask you something. What are the kind of main lessons which you learn as a person and as a practitioner of getting this experience of working with Rocky?
Christ. The main lessons as a person is probably, I think one thing that I reflect back on with Rocky is really getting to know him as an individual. You almost become best friends in a way. And we had many WhatsApp dialogues where, he might be worried about the weight one evening, or, is he where he needs to be? And I suppose the good thing that I did throughout was I always tracked it. I always had those numbers where I could pull up the spreadsheet and I could take a screenshot of it and I could share it with him and say, look, mate, you're exactly where you need to be. Jamie wants you at this weight for that final spar. This is the plan. Here's the strategy. Once you've done the final spar, that's where we're then going to start pulling it down. Don't worry. And I think that just becomes down to your relationship building. So that, yeah, definitely that as a person, probably always read the literature, and there's nothing wrong actually for me. You know, I had Cole, who was a brilliant sounding board really for me at the time, who again I owe a lot of my kind of knowledge and education to. But there's nothing wrong with like picking up the phone and just double checking and asking someone, you know, someone that may have been in that position before, and just cross checking with people. Ultimately, we all want fighters to make weight safely. We don't want people to do it in a detrimental manner to their health. So just cross checking with other people. And yeah, so I think that's probably the first part. And what was the second question you asked? Sorry, mate.
No, that was it. That's brilliant, mate. That's exactly right. That's awesome. And one more thing. If you were to walk to the ring and you were to have a fight, we can organize it. What would your ring walk song
running
be?
the other way.
Yeah, what would your ring walk song be, James, mate?
Oh,
Put you on the spot with these questions.
yeah, I think, and I don't want to get this wrong, but look, I lost my dad a couple of years ago to a fatal cardiac arrest. But there's a song that my dad's favorite artist was David Bowie, and there's a song called, I think it's called Starman, which yeah, whenever I hear that, it like obviously brings back loads of memories and stuff like that. But I think in that moment of fight or flight, going to the ring, I think, you know, I would probably put that on just as a bit of a reminder and really get me up for it, and probably just as a bit of a sign to dad to say, yeah, I'm going to either go and do you proud, mate, or get the the crap kicked out of me. But yeah, probably Starman, which is probably not like a big song to get you up for a fight, but Sweet Caroline by Rocky, you know, that's Rocky's theme tune, and I tell you what, when that goes off in the stadium, it's quite, it gives you those goosebumps, mate, when you hear all the fans singing that. And I think that's actually become a bit of a boxing ring walk song now.
Yeah,
that's good. What would yours be?
Mine would be Back in Black, 100%. Okay. I'm gonna make a playlist of everybody's on, and we'll get the Ringside Nutrition podcast out, ring walk playlist.
Yeah, no.
So I'll make sure to get that added, mate. Listen, James, thank you so much for giving up your time to talk to me today. And this is going to be a really great episode for people to listen to, especially fighters, to hear about how a professional champion, you know, maps out his nutrition and does everything the right way. So thank you so much, mate, for giving up your time.
All good. No worries. Thank you.